Good things to know today, huh? That he is alive. And he's on his throne. And that's important to know. Because sometimes it's easy to look at our lives, our own lives, or just life around us, and kind of forget those things. To get overwhelmed, to kind of get overtaken by just the stuff of life. And sometimes it's just good to be in a place with other people, to remind all of ourselves that he is alive. And that he is on his throne. And because of those two facts, there's hope for you. There's a possibility of change for you. There's a possibility to be something different than the stuff that you wish was different yesterday and last week, maybe even your whole life. And that's kind of where we're going in this series. We kicked it off last week, this idea of apply generously. Because there's just some stuff you really just need not only to apply, but apply generously. And today's topic is going to be on that. But let me just do a quick review. If you weren't here last week, let me get you caught up to speed. Last week, our big main point was simply this. Application is everything. That's what makes the difference, right? If you have a bucket of paint, and you're going to paint this wall over here, and you got your bucket of paint, it doesn't do you any good to have a bucket of paint, does it? Unapplied paint doesn't do anybody any good. In fact, it's a waste. And I was telling you last week, you can come down in my basement, the basement I'm supposed to be remodeling, and all my little piles of remodeling project stuff that I've got ready to do the job. And hopefully I'll get to it before the stuff goes bad. But, stuff goes bad at times, right? And this idea that application is everything is based on a very simple statement from James, the brother of Jesus, when he says, listen, do what God's teaching says. When you only listen and don't do anything, you're really only fooling yourself. And God doesn't want any of this to be fools. Any of us to be deceived and kind of say, hey, because I showed up today, he smiled at me, I got that checked on my board, God's going to do something great for me today simply because I showed up today. But there really is something more to this. In fact, our kind of concluding point last week was this. It's what you do, not what you intend to do. And all of us have felt that at times, right? And all of us have been on both sides of that. Somebody's asked us, hey, would you do this for me? And you say yes, and then you don't do it. Or when you've asked somebody, would you take care of this? And they say yes, and then they don't, you know how you feel, right? And so it really is what you do, not what you intend to do. And so today's topic is one that's going to get a little sticky, a little uncomfortable. So I want everybody to take a deep breath for a moment and then let it out. I was going to hold it for a second, but I don't want you to hold it too long. Take a deep breath and let it out. I just want you to relax because today we're going to talk about a topic that is tough for all of us. And for some of you, it's a topic that you've heard your whole life, but you've struggled with your whole life. How many of you grew up in homes where you were told that it's the right thing to do, that you're supposed to forgive other people? And because you were told that, it became a simple part of your life, right? Like everything else your parents told you. Do this. And you were like, oh, sure, Mom, Dad, that's great. And to this day, you have lived that kind of life, a life of always forgiving people, right? Immediately, generously, without thought, without encouragement. It has just become who you are. Right? See, the challenge for all of us is a lot of us grew up in, as you raised your hands, a lot of us grew up in homes where you're told it's the right thing to do to forgive other people. But when you think about it, it's one of those systems that just sort of doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel intuitive. It doesn't feel natural and normal for us because you know what happens. Somebody does something to you, and you don't want to forgive them, right? Say amen. That's right. Be with me this morning. And if they know you're a Christian, they kind of dig that knife in a little bit by saying, well, you're a Christian, you have to. That's right, because you're a Christian, you have to do it. So they get you, right? And then where God? Then you read all these things. I mean, over and over, Jesus says, love your enemies, pray for them, do nice, forgive this, forgive that, all this kind of stuff. And you're thinking, What's up with this? I think God's on my side. Hey, where are you at in this thing, right? You know, you're supposed to zap them. Get them with some, juice or something. No, hit them hard. But no, I'm supposed to love them, and I'm supposed to forgive them. And so you got them coming at you, you got God coming at you, and then you got your own stuff and your own struggles. And some of you know the reality of holding on to something for way too long, where it has gotten down deep inside of you, where it's become almost a defining part of your life because it's still there. Talk about the hat trick, huh? Them, God, and yourself. And yet somehow, we're called not only to forgive, but to forgive generously. Well, how does that work out? Especially for those of us in this room right now or watching online who don't want to forgive right now. Because it's not time yet, right? I mean, I need a little more time to get to that place, Mike. Or I want them to come and ask for forgiveness, but I really want them to ask forgiveness in a certain way, not just say, hey, Jose, can you forgive me? No, let's wait till you really kind of show me you're genuine about this, right? Then I'll think about it a little more, and we get all wrapped up in these things. So today we're going to go to a story that actually Jesus tells about what this whole idea of forgiveness and applying it generously looks like. But before we go there, I invite you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, okay? Lord, this is a topic that is hard for us. And Jesus, I know it's a topic you spent a lot of time talking about. And not just talking, you modeled it. You showed what this idea of forgiveness and living a forgiving life looks like. You even said those words to the person that was driving those nails into your hands as they were getting ready to kill you. You say, Father, forgive these people. Because they don't have a clue what they're doing. So today, Lord, I ask that you would just again remind us that you're in the right place. Not only you're on the throne in heaven, you're in the thrones of our lives. And we would pray that because you are in the right place, that you would help us to get in the right place with you as well. So just be with us now and speak into our lives and help us not only to hear, but to do something with it. Something that will not only bring honor and glory to you because of what we'll know has happened in life, but that will help us turn that corner and move away from bitterness, anger and resentment and the hurt of all of it into a place of letting go, of not making anybody owe us anything any longer. And if we can just at least make a couple of steps there that way today, Lord, it'll be a great journey and movement for us today in your name. Amen. Let me tell you a little bit what I told folks last week. If you're not a follower of Jesus in this room today, and there are probably some of you that are, just kind of showed up because you're in town, it's summertime, you're here with your family, and so we're glad you're here. And you kind of said, hey, they're going to church, I guess I got to go. That's okay, we're glad you're here. If you're kind of figuring this whole Christian thing out, religion, are you sure? I'm not really sure kind of thing. I want you to know that everything I talk about today has nothing to do with you. It doesn't. Now, you may get some good advice, some good principles out of it, and I hope you do. I hope you get some stuff that helps you in your life. But the stuff I'm going to say today, and I said last week, and I'm going to say next week, has nothing to do with people that aren't followers of Jesus. Because the stuff that Jesus talked about and that James wrote about was directed to people who said, thank you, Jesus. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for dying for me. Thank you for coming back to life for me. Thank you for doing all those things that gives me hope that my life can be different. That I can die to this old kind of way of life and live to a new kind of way of life. And as I try to figure that out, just kind of keep moving along with me. Keep helping me take those steps. And so again, don't feel any pressure. If you're not a believer today, that's okay. I don't want you to feel any pressure from me, okay? That's not my intent today. My intent is for the rest of us to feel pressure. An enormous amount of pressure. Because you know when applying something to Genesis, sometimes that's how you got to squeeze that last little bit out. So that's where we're going today. So here, let's go over to our story. Here's the truth I want us to center around today. The story centers around it, but even more than that, our life centers around this. And that's this. Forgiveness is more about me than she or he. Let that sink in for a moment. Because for some of us, we think, oh, no, it's about him. I got the picture in my mind right at the moment. It's about her. I can see her. I know what she did. Oh, if you knew what she did, Pastor, oh, you would be on my side. You know, you get that whole thing. But I'm telling you, and I want you to trust me on this. Forgiveness is more about me than it is she or he. That's why it has such a big part of our life. That's why it's so hard for us. Because as you think about that person or those people that hurt you in life, the reason you still hurt over it, the reason it brings such pain in life, the reason it has transformed the direction of your life for some of you, or right at this moment it's causing you great anguish and pain, the reason is because not so much about them, even though what they did was wrong, what they did was hurtful, what they did was totally unethical, but the reason it's so strong for you is because you're involved in it. And you were the target of it. And that's why forgiveness has more to do with you than them. So we're going to go over to a story over in Matthew chapter 18. It begins this way. Peter comes to Jesus one day. They've been talking about some different stuff. Some stuff's been happening. And he asked this question. It's a really good question. Peter comes up to the Lord, to Jesus, and asks, Jesus, how many times should I forgive someone who does something wrong to me? Is 7 times enough? Which for us, we kind of go, that's a weird question in the idea of having a number, but we all know that we have a number, right? You know, when the kids keep doing the same thing over and over, you go, how many times? Or that employee or your fellow employee, you know, they keep putting the stuff on your desk, and you keep saying, will you not put it on my desk? And they keep putting it on your desk. How many times do you have to say, enough's enough? That's Peter's question. How many times should I forgive someone who does something wrong to me? Is 7 times enough? Because 7's a pretty good number. I mean, you think about it. You don't mind forgiving somebody once, maybe, depending on what the issue is. A couple times. We get up about 5 or 6, you know, you're starting to think, hold on now. We need to have a little discussion. A little what we pastors call a come to Jesus discussion. Right? We're going to sit down and we're going to have it out. Because we need to get this thing straight, right? So he says 7. In fact, the Amplified Version, I love how it puts. How many times may my brother sin against me and I forgive him and let it go? How many times do I have to let it go? Because I kind of like holding on to it. At some point, I got to be able to hold on to it, Jesus, right? I mean, 7, that's a big number. And if you're familiar with the story, the answer that Jesus says is this. Peter, not just 7 times, but 77 times, or some of your versions say 70 times 7, and whether you want to go with 77 or 490, his point is not you're counting up going 76, 7, you know, that's not his point. His point is it just keeps going and going and going. To which when we hear that, we say, I'm not so good sure about this following Jesus kind of stuff, right? That's what Jesus expects. That's what he tells us. Not just 7 times, 77 or 490 or pick a number that you're not going to count up to. And then Jesus says this. This story, Peter, will show you what the kingdom of heaven is like. Jesus loves to tell stories, to teach lessons, and so he says, Peter, your question is, how many times do you have to forgive somebody? And you got a number, I got a number. But let me tell you a story, Jesus. This is what God's kingdom is like. This is what the kingdom of heaven is like. This is how it ought to really be working in my Father's kingdom. One day, a king decided to call in his officials and ask them to give an account of what they owed him. And so the king begins to do that. He begins to have these different officials come in, and he goes over the records. This guy owes this one owes that. You know, they've borrowed money, they've invested money, they've done all this stuff for his kingdom. And then one guy comes in, and they discover that this guy owes a ton of money. He owes something like 8,950,423,000, give or take a couple of dollars. To which the king says, what are you going to do? And the guy says, I have no money. To which the king says, okay, that's a ton of money, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to sell you as a slave. I'm going to take all your possessions. I'm going to sell them, try to recoup some of this money. I'm going to have to throw your wife and your kids into slavery as well, because somehow I got to recoup. I'm never going to recoup the 8,925,423,000, give or take a few dollars, but I'm going to try to get what little I can to cover some of it. And the guy, you know what he does? He falls down on his knees and begins to beg with the king. And he says words like, just have some patience with me. Give me some time. Have pity on me, and I will repay everything. Which we all know is a stupid thing to say, because nobody's going to repay that kind of cash. But the king's moved by this guy's story. In fact, he's so moved that he has compassion, and he says, listen, stand up. You've been one of my officials. I'm going to let you go free. I'm not going to sell you into slavery or your family into slavery. In fact, I am canceling the debt. Pretty amazing, right? Everybody give Jesus a hand there, right? That's a good story, right? Yeah. I mean, how would you like to have your student loans canceled right at this moment? Raise your hand. There we go. Yeah, you got to know which topic to talk about. Student loans, right? Bam, all done. All your debts, bam, done. Don't have to worry about bankruptcy. This is a greater bankruptcy. Everything's canceled, and you go on like life's great. And this guy leaves. You got to imagine what he's thinking in his brain. But he goes outside, and as he leaves the building that day, he sees another official who owes him some money. And so he stops him, but he doesn't just stop him. He grabs a hold of this guy. He begins to kind of shake him and choke him, and he says, you need to pay me the money you owe me, because this guy owes him a couple of $1,000s. And this other official, he falls down, and he says almost the exact same thing. He pleads with this guy and says, have patience with me, have some pity on me. I can repay everything, because it's only a couple $1,000s. I can get there. To which the first guy, who's been forgiven all this amount, says, too bad, so sad, off to jail you go. Because I'm going to get my money. Now there's some other folks standing around watching all this, some other officials, who kind of watched this guy as he left because they thought, what an amazing story, have all this stuff forgiven. But then they see him run this other official. So they do the right thing. And sometimes the right thing is to go tattle on somebody else. Not for you children. But for us adults, sometimes the right thing is to go tell. And they go tell the king everything they saw take place. And the king is ticked off. He gets the official drug back into him. As soon as the guy comes in, he looks at him and simply says these words, you evil man. Not just bad, you are evil. After everything I forgave you, after I canceled everything, let you go free. And this is the words. Don't you think you should show pity to someone else as I did for you? It seems like a fair question, doesn't it? In fact, the king was so angry that he orders the official to be tortured, not just thrown in prison, but tortured until he can repay the debt, which means he's going to be tortured the rest of his life, because he's not paying off $8,950,423,000, give or take a couple of bucks. Because the king is ticked off at him. That's the story. But here is Jesus' conclusion that hurts. This, Jesus says, is how my Father in heaven will treat you. If you don't forgive with all your heart. I don't know about you, that doesn't sound like a very gracious comment for Jesus to make. But it does seem like a fairly fair comment for Jesus to make. Because that's what he's describing in the story. So this is how God's kingdom works. That there is something in all of us that when we have experienced forgiveness, that at least from God's point of view apparently, should change the way we look at forgiveness, not just for ourselves, but from ourselves. See, forgiveness is more about me than he or she. And our actions determine God's response towards us. And I've read a bunch on this. I mean, Jesus makes this similar statement in a number of different places. He'll say, if you don't forgive others, my Father won't forgive you. And his point in all these kinds of point isn't that your forgiveness hangs in the balance with how you treat others, that you've got to forgive in order to get forgiveness. His point is that when you get forgiveness, when you get it, but you don't get it, you don't get it. Get it? That there is this expectation from God that as we experience forgiveness, that it ought to do something to us, that it ought to change how we respond. And that if it doesn't, then it really can't because of what it's done to us. See, I told you it was getting a little pressure, right? So what do we do with all that? What do we do with this idea of forgiveness and this sort of high bar for forgiveness? Because remember, Jesus has not given us, for us Christians, the grace card here. You know, he's not giving us the Paul statement, I'm accepted. It's all about grace. Not any kind of action I'll do, so I don't boast anything about it. I think it plays into here. But that is not Jesus' point at this moment. Jesus' point was to one of his closest followers. And that question he asked that we all ask. How many times? How many times do I have to forgive them? And we don't like to know that it's an unending number. Because for some of us, we're afraid of what forgiveness might mean. For some of us, we enjoy the idea that somebody owes us something. And let's be honest. Holding a grudge feels good for a while, doesn't it? I mean, think about it. You hold this grudge, you get about, and then you begin to fantasize about how things are going to work out, Man, if this happened to them, right? It's just like, man, that would be, and you begin to have all these stuff, and it kind of goes on, and our problem with any kind of fantasy in our life is it's not real, but it becomes sort of real, and it finds a place in our lives, and we just kind of hope and think and begin to scheme and think, that'd be terrible if this happened to them. No, I could never do that. But, and we miss that this is not simply about the idea of forgiving someone else. See, this forgiveness is really more about me than she or he. This is really about what forgiveness or the lack thereof does to me. And if you ever struggle with it, you know exactly what it does to you. You know the darkness that takes place. You know the sinister nature of holding grudges. You know what it's like to run into that person at the grocery store. Because your body tells you, oh no. So there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way with dealing with this whole thing of forgiveness. And it's more than, if you remember, Jesus says there, he said, this is how my Father will deal with you if you don't forgive people from the heart. Because I guess all of us have seen some time in our lives this play out, either as we were the child or have seen children do this. Two children have had some outs. The teacher gets them together, the parent gets them together. They put them opposite each other and they say to this one, you say you're sorry. Say you're sorry, and everybody goes, oh, yeah, exactly like that, right, yeah. And they look at the other one and they say, okay, now tell them they're forgiven, right? And this one goes, I forgive you, right, yeah. But we know that neither is either, right? Neither is sorry, neither is willing to forgive, but we want to go through the motions because it's the right thing to do. And Jesus is not looking after the right thing to do when he tells this story. That's why he says if you don't forgive from your heart. This is not a legal kind of thing. This is I got to forgive you because I'm a Christian, even though I don't want to forgive you because you're an idiot. But you know what I mean? This is about Jesus saying a change has to take place. And that change is not taking place in their life. It's got to take place in our lives. And until we see that, we can't believe that. But when we do see that, it gives God an amazing amount of room to work and space to work in our lives. To do something that we all need. So let's look at some better ways. A better way is to see it for what it's doing to you. What is not being forgiving kind of a forgiving person, whether it's in specific about a person or sort of general life, what is not being a forgiving person doing to you? If when I talked earlier and said, talked about forgiving somebody, I said you have that picture in your mind. If a picture came up in your mind, what it's doing to you is always staying with you. And at what point is it enough that you just got to say, I'm letting go of this? Even though you're afraid by letting go of it means they're not going to pay anything for it. But forgetting the whole time that you're the one that's been paying the most for it. Any of you ever run into somebody that you held a grudge for years? Run into them years later, and they're all glad to meet you? Hey, Mike, how you doing? Hey, man, long time no see. And you're thinking, you back in high school, didn't you? You remember all that kind of stuff, right? And then you were going to begin to remember that after all these years that you've held on to it, they went on with their life. So the idea that I'm going to let it go and they're going to get away with something, they have already gotten away with something. But you haven't gotten away with anything. Another better way is to experience the power of forgiveness, which is really kind of what Jesus talks about, this guy who gets forgiven this an amazing amount of money, right? That was the king's intent. And apparently that's the big father's intent. That we would experience the power of forgiveness. Not that we would experience forgiveness, but we would experience the power of forgiveness. Because the power of forgiveness is about the reality that you're in control of it. And the power to let go is a much stronger power than the power to hold on. A better way is to choose not to be owed. Because when you say to somebody you're forgiven, what you're really saying to them is, you don't owe me any longer. Because that's why we don't forgive them, because they owe us something. They owe us to face up to what they did. They owe us to apologize not only to us, but to everybody that saw this situation. They owe us to go back and make it right, to get everything back in place where it was. They owe us, they owe us, they owe us. And that's why we don't want to let go, because we don't want them to get away. We want them to know they owe us. But when we choose not to be owed by anybody, we are free not to have to keep records any longer. And I don't know how many of you enjoy keeping records. It is not high on my list of things I enjoy doing. If you went in my office, you would notice that. You know, I put stuff in filing cabinets just to get it off my desk, but I have no idea where most of it's at. You were designed for moments that challenge your character to trump your circumstances. And that's how God sees you. Sees you as somebody capable of, with his help, with responding to what he's done for you, capable of trumping your circumstances. And you need to know that. Because all of us get in those places where we don't feel like we're strong enough or have enough power or really at the place where we really want to do this. And we need to know that we are designed for those kind of moments. But it's in those moments none of us want to have to face, that the greatest changes can take place. Let me wind up with a great statement from Martin Luther King Jr. If you're not familiar with him, I'm kind of surprised, but let me just give you a little major figure in American history, a civil rights leader, and a guy who did it in a certain way, the idea of peaceful resistance. We would resist, we would make our voices known, but we would do it in a way that wasn't fighting, we would just do this kind of thing. We do it from his perspective in this idea of loving way. That loving doesn't mean not trying to get things fixed, but it means done in a certain way. And this is an amazing statement I ran across this week. We must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. Develop and maintain. Because for most of us, if not all of us, forgiving doesn't come as a natural thing. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. There is some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. And when we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies. For me, that statement has huge power when I know the backstory behind the situation to which he wrote those words. People that weren't treated as equal. People that were cut off. People that had to fight in a very quiet, humble way to get their voices heard. And for him to be able to say, if you're devoid of the power to forgive, you lose your power to love as well. Listen, the most significant spiritual act you can do is to forgive. It really is the most significant spiritual act you can do, because forgiveness is about me. It's not about she or he. And it's the one thing that we can do that's sort of this otherworldly kind of thing, this so unintuitive. But it really is the call, the expectation, and the invitation of God for us to join in on what his kingdom looks like. So I'm going to leave the pressure on you as we leave today, because it's where Jesus placed the pressure. For us to be honest before him, for us to try to figure this whole thing out about that person, that circumstance, that situation. And you may not be ready to get there. As we close, I'm not trying to point a finger at anybody, okay? You may not be able to get there right now, and that's okay. But I want you to know something. When you do get there, But you remember, you can get there. And as you have that ability within yourself, those are the kind of moments you're created for. To be able to trump your circumstances.